Hello, this is Hilary Porter again. I'm going to show here the alchemy of laying out very, very thin surfaces which can then be felted down and shrunk to something very, very small. I'm going to do a cylindrical vessel and as you can see I've got the resist out and it's roughly cut, as you can see. Tried to make sure there are no sharp corners, and it doesn't really matter what the shape is because you're going to mould it as you go along. So first of all I'm going to lay out terribly thin layer of wool fibre. It actually doesn't matter what you're using, but it has to have some wool in it to make it stick, as we all know, and as long as there's sort of some of that going roughly through the whole thing, it'll be fine. This is actually a little bit thicker than I would normally do it, but it's going to work anyway. I also put in loads and loads, actually as much as I can, of other things like silk fibre, silk papers, wool papers, and fabric. So I'm going to put in this red organza, which I've already put on the other side. As you'll see, I've laid the other side out first. I think I'll just cut the end of that because it's a little bit long. You don't have to be, it doesn't have to be flat, it doesn't have to be precise in shape, just thin. I'm going to put some other fabric in as well. This is some silk, and I think what I'll do is overlay some more fibre to give it a bit more interest. And I think I might add in at this point a bit of, this is silk and wool paper, and just pull it right apart so that it's really, really thin. This is some silk and wool mix, which I'll just lay down the side there. I think I want to put a bit more fabric in, which will be this orange silk. It doesn't matter if there are holes, because when it shrinks up, the holes will become smaller and it will crinkle up. I think I'll just overlay a bit of this to make sure those get stuck down. I'm not too worried about the edges because the underneath will come round and seal it up. So now I'm just going to wet this out. I'll give it a bit of a rub. I quite like to set it like that. So I'm just going to wet it out and lay over my plastic. Bit of soap on.
Is that warm water or cold water?
It's warm water. To be honest, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
It can even be cold and it will still be fine. And as I pull it back, you can see just how thin that is. This is ruched up, doesn't matter. It'll add to the interest in the end. And now what I'll do is I'll turn in the edges and work at it on the resist a bit. As you can see, I think, yes you can, the top of the resist is open. I haven't laid over it, so that I will work on it a bit till it starts firming up, just to that firm stage. Then I'll take the resist out and start working with it on its own and eventually put it over a form, but I can show you some of that later.
Hi, it's Jen here again, and I'm going to show you how I go about laying out one of my landscape felted pieces and how the fibres come together. So to start with, I will often make myself what I consider to be my canvas that I'm going to work on. So this is 4 layers of merino, which I have wetted out and I've turned the edges because I do quite like a straight edge on them. Prefer to work on a damp surface, and then I find that I can create what I want to on that more easily. I'm going to start by taking a couple of colours of merino, and I do a lot of blending with little dog brushes. I like the scale of them, and it allows me to just mix small amounts of fibre to give me plenty of variety into what I create. So I'll use the brushes not to over blend the colours, but to combine them lightly and give me the softness that I want to merge the colours together for areas like the sky. And the nice thing about using smaller quantities is that as you go along, you can think, actually, I want the sky to be a bit more blue or a bit more purple. And you can work that across as you go. So I like to just make decisions as a sort of ongoing process, and even where I don't blend colours, I'll often just put them onto the brush to help me control the layout of them, and it helps give me a softer edge. So having laid out the sky, I then start to consider what I'm going to do with the rest of the landscape. So this is where I start to introduce wool papers or half felts. So much as with my collage work, where I make a lot of coloured papers with paint or inks, for this work I'll make a selection of half felts. I sometimes use wool papers, which are a bit thinner. I also like to incorporate the edges of these where they're quite thin in places, because that'll again give you a different effect. So at this stage, I would start to think about the positioning I wanted. I'm going to have some water at the bottom here, so I'm going to place a piece on to start to position that. And I would choose a selection of colours, and you can see these aren't just one blend that's laid out. There's been a lot of different colour mixing going on within these. And from those sections, I'll cut out the shapes that I want to incorporate. So the distant hills here, I've used a thinner felt, and I want to just let it soften out at the end so that I don't end up with a hard edge under the other pieces that I'm putting on top. So I've left a nice soft edge here. And I have had a look and pre-cut these pieces so that I can start to build up the landscape. Now I like how this comes thin here because that lets it blend into the water, and as you start to felt these later on in the process, you'll get some of the colours from the water coming through. What I'll also do, having laid these out, is maybe add little bits of detailing, maybe where the water's edge is going to come in. Might put a few fibres in. And I might incorporate other types of fibres, sometimes silks, quite often ramie. I like how that blends in and gives me highlights in the water. What I'm going to do is just carry on working on this for some time, and then I shall wet it out again. And in order to wet it out, often when I'm working, I'll get to a point like this and sort of wet things out to see how I'm doing. And I think the tendency is to think that once you've wet the piece out, that's you made the decision that it's finished. And it doesn't have to be. So I can wet this out, get things stuck in place. But at this stage, there's nothing to stop you saying, actually, I would like to have more colour in the sky. And you can go back and add more fibres into it. So what I'll do is just continue to work on this, and I'll turn the edges back under to keep everything square, and I'll come back and let you see how it's progressed later.
Hi, I'm back again with having worked on my piece for a while it was on the resist, and I did a bit of rolling and a bit of setting it, rubbing it. I forgot to mention at the beginning that the resist is 60 centimetres long, and the piece as it is now, most of it takes up 50 centimetres now, so it has shrunk a bit, but it's going to shrink an awful lot more. So I've taken it out of the resist, move that out of the way, and I'm going to dunk it in some warm water to warm it up. And it's felted enough now that you can handle it quite easily. So there it is, and you can still see how thin it is. I'll put a bit of soap on my hands just to help the process along. And what I'm going to do now is take my lovely vase from home, and I'm going to put the piece over the top of the vase. You'll notice the vase has lots of ridges. Those won't come out in the end result, but they help with the shrinkage. So I can slip it over. What the vase mainly helps for me now is to shape the bottom. I've put more fibre on the bottom than I have anywhere else, and that's because in the end I do want it to stand on its own. So I'll work away quite a lot now on this resist, getting the shape of the bottom right, because you can see it's still got the shape of the resist, but it will shrink round the bottom of this vase. I will also gently do the sides as well, because this of course will help the shrinkage as well. At this stage I want to be very gentle with it. I don't want to be too rough, because I don't really want to pull it apart any more than it is now. But it is quite robust, so you needn't be, you know, I'm not sort of scared of it. So I will just carry on with this until it's shrunk to a shape that I think is reasonable, and then I will work on it more and show you the results later.
Oh hi, I'm Pat again. I'm going to show you how I try to increase the level of low relief in my pieces. I do this quite often with trees. You can see in this piece, I work them by hand to make them stand out from the background really, and I do this over a number of rounds of felting, pinching them and tweaking them, and that's the sort of effect I'm trying to get. I'm going to show you how I do it on another piece, a sample I'm working on at the moment, and it's with some foliage in the foreground of a piece that I've already half felted, and it's still quite soft, as you can see. It's Shetland with merino and other fibres. I've done some stitching on it, and also I've put lots of small half felts. This is what it looks like dry. I'll show you one end, and it's these little half felts that I want to try and bring forward to the surface. So I've wetted this side, and I'm going to work the rest of it with just a piece of builder's plastic, good old builder's plastic. So I'm going to start off by rubbing quite hard in the background, and as you can see, I'm avoiding the actual little mini half felts, because I'm going to squeeze and pinch them a lot more later, but I want to try and sink the background behind. I quite like it where they're two joining and I can get a little ridge down with my fingernail. Now I can already see that the background's starting to recede, which is what I'm trying to make happen. And I'll do this around the stitching areas as well, because I'll probably pinch them to give them a little bit more relief. Now going down to these foliage pieces, I'm just going to literally pinch them with my two fingernails, my thumb and my finger, and then I'll slide my finger along. Now at the moment this is quite wet, but as it dries, just dries naturally, I'll carry on tweaking them, because I get it's more effective as it's partially dry. I'll just keep reinforcing the level of relief in each little piece, and then when it's completely dry I might even re-wet it again and do another round of rubbing and tweaking.
Letting it dry in between, does that make a difference rather than just working it wet in one go?
I think so. I think it firms up the ridges. I think that's what I've found. But sometimes I might do 4, 5 or 6 rounds of felting and refelting, and it's a bit unnerving at first because you see your ridges when you re-wet it. You see the relief that you've introduced fall backwards, but then I think when you redo it again, they're actually much firmer. So again, I'll just go along, I'll carry on, and it's quite a time-consuming process, but it is also quite relaxing, just tweaking your felt and making your ridges with your fingers. And I think it's just nice to be in contact with your material, with your wool. Now I'll carry on right along here with all of these, and some of them are bigger than others, and that's quite fun as well, because some of them they'll hopefully by the time I finish this, they'll be different heights, and so that gives it a little bit more life, I think, as a landscape. And all the time I'm also rubbing the background in. And in the background there's all sorts of spun threads as well, and with the different felting processes, they'll come to the fore again, because some of them are quite hidden. See, there's one there, it's just a little thread going over, but as I rub the background, all of those threads that I've put into the background half felts will come to the surface. And it gives it an extra little dimension. Now with the sky, I want that there to be very smooth, so I'll just do that with my fingers. And again, there's various fibres and bits of silk and even other materials. Sometimes I'll put into the sky, and they'll come forward as I carry on rubbing. And then the foreground's starting to come to the fore as well, where I've put the stitching. So I'll just carry on doing this, and I might actually at some point rub a little bit of the back, but predominantly I'm working on the front at the moment. When I turn it over onto the back, what I'll mostly be doing, I'll be able to feel the ridges, but what I'm mostly doing is rubbing between the ridges and rubbing the sky. And as you can see, it's hardly damp at the back, but it doesn't really matter because there's enough moisture in it really to felt it a bit more, and there's plenty of more rubbing to go on that. Now I'll come back and check my ridges again and do more pinching. So that's the way I like to do it, and I do this with trees as well as other foliage.
Hello, my name's Rachel Battersby, and I'm going to share a technique with you that has evolved over the last few months. I was in recovery and not really able to do large pieces of felt, and yet I still wanted that mindful aspect of my felt making whilst recovering. And so I started to make threads which I could incorporate into my work, more small manageable pieces. My theme is the Scottish Islands, and I was very much wanting to reflect this in the landscape and do some larger hangings, but not able to make bigger pieces. I decided to do these small threads and then incorporate them. And I went back to needle felting because it was more accessible at the time to do dry felting and then incorporate this into my larger pieces of work later on. My landscapes aren't traditional depictions of landscapes. They're not a true representation. I'm not gifted in that way, but I prefer to do things that are representational. And I'm using lots of different fabrics and yarns in my work. The chiffons and the silks are really lovely when they're needle felted because they give this great ruched effect, which is a really nice aspect to give some texture in work. So I use a variety of different fibres and different fabrics. Sometimes I'll just do this and be completely random with what I'm doing. And other times I might think that I want to depict something in the landscape, maybe fencing that needs a vertical aspect, or something that might be circular or more boulder-like and round. And I might try to create that within a thread. But more often than not, it's just completely random with what I'm creating. And generally I've started by using a piece of pre-felt, or it might be a piece of a half felt that I've made and cut up, or dyed at home, and then use the pre-felt as the backing. And so it's quite playful to do it this way. These are just some of the threads that I've created previously. And I'll use these either whole as they are, or maybe even cut up further. As you can see, this is quite a heavy one with a lot of texture in it. And again, I'll probably even cut this further. This has already been cut from a large piece that I've made. And then quite often in my overall larger pieces, I also use some wallpapers that I've created, and again cut these up as a thread and incorporate those into my work. So this is one of my pieces that I've created, which is using all of the threads that I've created here. And I've also been looking at pleats, so I've ruched these to make them into the bigger piece.
So this is the piece of felt after it has been wet out and fully felted. When we saw it last time, I decided it needed a little bit of dark in the water here. So I've cut some very thin pieces reflecting the colour of these distant hills, added a little more rammy here, and added a bit more dark to the sky. Now that it's fully felted, you can see where the thinner felts give you a softer edge that blends through with the other colours and background colours. The thicker felts give you a really nice sharp edge, so where you want definition, you can create that by intentionally using a thicker felt there. The magic of how all this individual fibre just comes together to make one piece is fabulous. And at this stage, I may consider sewing in to add more detail. But that's you got your one piece of fabric to work with.
So I've been working away at this. It was 50 centimetres, it's now 24, 25 centimetres, something like that. And you can see the fabric has ruched up wonderfully, and there are lots of holes in it, which is fine. At this stage I'm going to move it onto a smaller form because I want it to shrink even more. The bottom has got more fibre on it than anywhere else because, as I mentioned before, I do want it to be able to stand up. So now it's wet, I've warmed it up, and I shall keep working at the bottom, the base, and at the sides to try and firm it up even more. I do a little bit on the form like this, especially for the bottom, and then I take it off and I'll do some rolling on itself, just in my hands, like that. And just keep moving it around and it'll shrink up even more and get smaller and smaller, which to me is, you know, an amazing thing that felt will do with all these different things put in it. And, you know, the textures that you get from the silk within it. And you can use other fabrics, you can use cotton or anything really, as long as the wool will grab onto it, then it will work. And what I really like about this organza is that it goes quite stiff when it ruches up like that. And then I will dry it on a form. I think it'll probably go even smaller than this. And then hopefully it should stand up and it will look hopefully something. I quite like to have a really organic end top to it, but we'll see what the final thing turns out. I'm never quite sure.
Hi, it's Sue again.
I'd like to show you a little bit about how I go about weaving with paper. So in front of me I've just got a very straightforward loom. It's called a Shat school loom, quite robust, and I've set it at 6 ends per inch with some black warp, and the warps need to be quite wide to get the materials through. So I use recycled paper, and this is how it comes. I buy it from George Wheel. You can get things on Etsy, but George Wheel is very reasonably priced, and it comes up bound like this. It's made by a group of ladies in India, and they spin the paper, so when you actually look closely at the paper, it's got lots of writing on it, and it's got these little pops of colour, which is where the adverts have been in the newspapers, and it gives a lovely textural effect to weave. So that's how it comes from George Wheel. The other thing that I use is raffia. So here's a piece that I've done before just to show you. You can see where I've used the newspaper in the weaving, and then I've got this pop of yellow raffia, and then also here's some black raffia. And I get my raffia from a company called Pullinger's, which is down south, and they have a couple of shops, but they've got a really good online website. They've got lots and lots of colours to choose from, and again, it's very, very reasonably priced. It comes in massive bundles. I've actually had to unroll this one. I'm going to use some glue to show you today, but you get a huge amount for your money, and it comes in these long strips, which are probably about 1 metre long, and that's great to use. So I thought I'd show you how I actually weave this. This stuff is really lively. It's got a mind of its own, and it's actually quite delicate. I've found that you can't really weave with probably more than 1 metre at a time, because it just gets too fiddly. And there's various techniques that I've probably taught myself, really, just to make it easier. It's one of those things that you develop your technique as you go along. But hopefully you can see here how I've set up the loom. I've got a piece of mount board here, so I can beat down onto it. I have actually put half hitches down at the bottom, so that when I cut it off the loom, it's not all going to go pear-shaped. The reason I've used black warp this time is because you can't get a truly weft-faced cloth. So you get these little pops of black, and I think it would be really great fun to use, you know, a warp that was a bright orange or a bright green and stuff, which again you can get from various suppliers. And you just get these little pops of stripy marks. The other thing that happens with the newspaper is you come up to an advert which is a different colour, rather than just going across and back. What I quite like to do is to turn it on itself. So there's a tiny little yellow advert there, so I've turned that as I've woven things to bring it out into a pop of colour. Likewise with the blue there, and you can make like little shapes and things. So this piece was started off with straightforward tabby weave, going forward and backward there. And then here I've started doing some eccentric weave, so the yarn will have gone in that sort of shape. And I always think they look like geological faults. You get these lovely sort of geological marks. Here I've it's gone back into a horizontal piece again. I've started some eccentric weave there, and I'm actually in the process here of eccentric weaving. So I'll just show you how I do that. You do need a decent shed, so I've got my little stick here, and I'm just going to lift the shed up. Because the paper tears, it handles very differently to wool. You can't pull it, you have to place it, and inevitably it does tear, and you end up you have to deal with that as it happens if you're a little bit rough. So that's just to be expected. But I've just made the shed here. I'm going to actually feed it through with my fingers, trying not to drag it too much because all these little things will get caught on it. And what I'll do when I come to this warp is I'll actually fold it round and just space these out. It is a very, very much a hand-on sort of weaving. And I've got this tool here, which some of you may use. You get these lovely little beaters with these brass tips.
and I use that to actually bring the paper down. So again, I'll start not at the end, I'll start just sort of halfway through the weaving, bring it down, and then as I come to the end here, squish it in. And it's great, this paper, because you can actually squish it and almost mould it and just make it lie how you want it to be. You actually have to place it rather than weave it. So if I just go back into this one and do it, and I'll just show you another row going in there. I haven't actually got any bits of adverts on this, so there aren't any colour bits to do here. But what we're going to do is, again, just make sure your shed's deep enough, bring it round like that, fold it in, and then I actually squish it in with my nails and my thumb. And what you'll find is when you've done several rows of these, despite you thinking that you've squashed it down, you've still got gaps. So you can use this metal tip, but the tip is to actually, sorry, I suppose the bonus thing is not to actually use the tip, because that will cut it. It acts as a knife. So if you use the broader part of the metal, you can actually bring the paper closer and squash it down more, and just leave as much or as less, little as the warp. The warp that you want to show. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take that through to the back, and I'll show you what to do with the raffia. So the raffia, by the time you've taken it out of its bundle, it's all fallen apart like this. And you can use as many or as little as you want. I'm going to use three bits of raffia for this. So I'm just going to go again. I'm going to put a diagonal piece and just pick up the warp there. So I've got my shed, feed it through. This one here, I think what I might do is just weave it from the middle. Squish it down like that. This behaves differently to the newspaper, and what I'm going to do is just bring it back up, and I'm going to make it join in the middle. So make the shed there, bring it in, squash that down so I'm making sure I'm not pulling the selve edge in, and then I've not picked up the correct shed. Let's just do that like that, and then go back that way, get it out of the way and squash it down. And again, it's great fun. You don't have to think about it if you don't want to. You're not following a cartoon. You can just make up whatever pattern you want, and this is so flexible that you can get really nice soft curves with that. So I hope that's interesting to you, to just see a different sort of weaving using different materials.
This is the little sample after I've done another 3 rounds of drying it out and then rubbing it again for about 20 minutes, rubbing it with my finger and some damp builder's plastic to retract the background, the sky mostly, and some ridges within, and tweaking the little lines, the vegetation, to give it some contour. I tried to keep some of the contour in the sand dunes. That's what it's based on. It's based on a photograph of the sand dunes and the marram grass and the other vegetation that grows on it. So I'd basically re-wet it, rub it again, tweak it, and then dry it again. So I've done that 3 times, and this is the effect that I've been trying to get. So I have some contour in the land, and then the sky is as smooth as I can get it.
Do you find that letting it dry in between and then coming back and working it wet is a benefit over just working it for an hour wet?
I think so, definitely. I think the effect of drying it out makes quite a big difference. I don't know why I think that, but I think if I was just to rub it for an hour, I'd struggle to get the same level of effect, so I always leave it to dry out. And sometimes it might take 5 or 6 rounds of redrying. I think, and because this is done in Shetland, and the colours, these colours are mostly dyed Shetland, and then there's some merino and other fibres mixed in. But I definitely find that makes quite a big difference. It'll suddenly go, the Shetland, it'll be quite soft, and then round about the 5th or 6th time it will suddenly go hard, and it's quite striking, the sudden change in it.
The other thing that looking at it now, when we looked at your embroidery book last month and we looked at the couching, it was getting sucked into the felt, and the way you've worked your fingers there with the couched threads that are on there, you've kept it proud. It's a lovely line, isn't it?
It's striking now how different it is, isn't it? It's the opposite, really, that this is. And I don't know if that's partly what I've done is I've couched a thicker thread as well. It's a knitting wool. It's 100% wool, a knitting wool thread. But also I've tried to retract it in between to keep some of the couching proud. In the dunes.
So the loftiness of a knitting thread's really coming to its own.
Made a
here.
difference, I think.
Yeah, lovely.
And here it is finally dried out and finished. You can see how it's shrunk even more, and there's a lot of texture in it. The silk has shrunk up or been pulled up by the wool so that it's quite rigid, and the organza, stiff to start with, becomes even stiffer, and it helps with them holding the whole thing up. And the holes don't matter at all. In fact, that's what I wanted, holes and sort of raggedness. And you can see that, I think we can finally see that it stands up beautifully. And I will, with these kinds of things, I will often put a battery light down deep inside so that in the evening you can see the glow through all the different holes and fabrics.
Do you also get shadows from that?
Yes, you do.
Oh,
you
how
do.
beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful.
Hi, it's Kate, and I'm wanting to tell you a little bit about my journey of dyeing and colouring. I love colour, I love to dye, and this book was a real eye-opener to me. It was one of the few books about dyeing with acid dyes, and Gail Callaghan opened up this idea for me of dyeing with stock solutions at different strengths. So here we have some basic colour wheels created, dyeing with stock solutions of the same strength. So they're all a depth of shade of 1. And what you can see is that the yellow is bright, the blue has depth, the red in between, and it kind of advances and recedes as you go around. And this is on silk, on wool and on cotton, fibre reactive dyes on the silk and cotton, acid dyes on the wool. So what Gail looked at was creating dye stock solutions of different strengths so that the yellow is still at a depth of shade of 1, but the red is now a depth of shade of 1/2 and the blue is depth of shade of 1/4. That allows us to mix colours equally so that the depth of shade is equal, it's flat. The colour wheel isn't now advancing and receding, it is flat, but it means that all these beautiful greens and oranges and purples can be mixed very, very easily. And that for me was just opened up so many opportunities for colour mixing. So the middle green here is mixed with half blue and half yellow, 50-50. Whereas if I was going to mix that in the paint palette, I would be adding a couple of hairs of the brush of blue into the yellow to be able to start to mix the greens. So I don't have to be thinking about awkward percentages. So I've dyed a colour library, really excited about it. I've done it on cotton, silk and wool, but I'm just going to show you it on wool and see what I've done. All of the samples I'm going to show you are on Weaver's Bazaar Fine, so that I can take it into my tapestry weaving. So what I'm really excited about here is that I can mix my dyes as I would mix my paints, and we do a lot of colour mixing here in paint, being able to explore colour, mix and match colours, and we work from some quite rigid paint charts, but they really guide us. So what I've been able to do here is to actually dye my paint charts. So here are all the different secondaries. So the secondaries produced by mixing warm and cold primaries in different combinations and formats, and getting all of these beautiful purples, sometimes browns, by exploring them and mixing and discovering what they will do. And it's just an incredible resource. So what I've been able to do is just step away from the colour wheel, and not just to dye the colours on the colour wheel, but actually in different combinations that we see in nature. We see so many of these non-bright colours in nature, as well as the really bright.
So Kate, is that combination there, they're the secondaries? Is that the secondary?
That's the secondary colours. Then what I've done is gone berserk. And what I've been able to do is to go across the colour wheel. And I've been able to dye the complements, which are the colours that are opposite one another. And I've been able to dye the tertiaries, which are the secondaries mixed in pairs. And I've just been able to create all of these beautiful colours, often leading to neutrals in the middle, the browns and neutrals, particularly with the complements. But it shows me the neutral that would be right if I was working with a purple and an orange, for instance. And I've been able to take in pairs the colours, still going back to my colour wheel and being guided by it. By now I've added to my stock solutions, so that I do actually have stock solutions of the purples and the oranges and the greens, so that I can mix a scale of them very easily and simply. But it's just opened up all of these beautiful colours that I can now refer to if I want to come in and match and mix a palette and work with them. I haven't got every colour that you can mix, but I have a good starting point and guide. So the other thing that Gail looked at was how to create tints. And she looks at creating a very light tint, a mid tint, and then the full shade. I've looked at getting the gradations in between, so that I have a much smoother scale of tints, which can be really useful in tapestry weaving. And so I've been tinting with different, with the grayscale, but also with colours and creating and exploring colours that I use in my tapestries. So quite often I will dye a scale to work with in a tapestry. I've also been looking at toning, and toning is where you take the colour sideways, so you're adding grey into it. So that I've been putting different greys next to it and working with that, and then looking at adding in black, which is shading, and being able to darken the colours. So there's a lot of exploration going on here of exploring the tints, the tones and the shades. And then what I'm able to do is, when I'm starting a project, is to look at the colours in the project. So this is a tapestry that I'm starting, which has a purple and a yellow in it. And what I've done is I've explored, first of all, worked out how to mix the colours that I want, the purple and the ochre, but then exploring them as tints and tones and shades of themselves, but also in combining them. So particularly useful in tapestry weaving, if I've got some transparencies going on and I've got the colours overlapping each other, I can physically dye what the overlaps would be, so that that starts to inform the transparencies that I'm going to work with. And here is a piece that I've just worked on, just finished, which is a piece of shibori on blanket. And it's an old blanket that's from a charity shop, and I've shibori dyed it, and I've matched the colours in the shell. I matched 3 colours that I wanted to use, and I used them in the lightest mix, the medium mix, and the full shade mix, applying them to tied and stitched and clipped shibori to create this piece based on this shell that I've been exploring, and I'm just really, really excited about it. I had some dye left over, so I've dyed some skeins, and this is a silk, and I just used the light here and a little bit of the medium just to get a wash of colour, and I think that'll be really exciting as a fine silk to bundle in with my tapestry, and it will really come forward and add light into the Weaver's Bazaar. I also had some of the full shade and mid left over, so I threw that onto a wool boucle yarn, and this one I'm just going to keep. Maybe I'll use it as a weft in cloth weaving, and make that into something like a jacket or something like that. I think it will be absolutely stunning. So from one book and one idea, I've been able to really run with it, and it's allowed me to explore in dye what I've been doing in paint for years, and it's just really opened up my understanding of colour and how colour works, how it comes together. And I've started to teach it here at Arty Bird, which has been really exciting, and I've turned it into an online course called Dye a Colour Library, and it takes forever to do, but it is so worth doing, and those who've done it or are in the middle of it keep coming in to show me and tell me what they've understood. And what that's really shown me is how everybody sees colour completely differently, and although I have used certain dyes and I've just chosen dyes that are solid colours as opposed to mixtures of colours, some people go, oh, that's been too orange for me, and so we've altered and adjusted the stock solution so that it works for them because of the way their eye sees colour. And also I've had a student who's gone, I don't want the pale colours, I want strong colours. So they've doubled the strength of the stock solutions because they wanted them as threads to stitch with on top of their felt, which is already establishing a contrast. So it's been interesting to see how people have been able to adapt that course for themselves and the way that they see and work with colour.